I grew up in Canberra and was always interested in policing. I did spend some time overseas, but it had always been my ambition to be a police officer. But having grown up in Canberra, I decided that I would like a change, and in 1965 I joined the New South Wales Police Force and did my training there and served in the inner city area in Sydney. However, due to some personal circumstances, meeting a young lady in Sydney who wanted to come to Canberra, I resigned from the New South Wales Police Force in 1966, worked at some other jobs and then joined the ACT Police Force in 1969. I was stationed at City Station for approximately 6 to 8 months, but then they were very short in the accident squad, and I, with some of my other classmates, applied to the accident squad, and there were approximately 3 or 4 of us who all joined the accident squad, increasing the size of the accident squad. The accident squad at that stage was quite unique in Australia. Most other police forces in Australia didn't have specialised accident investigation, whereas the ACT Police Force was very much a forerunner in a lot of things. One of the reasons I left New South Wales Police was because the ACT Police Force was held up throughout the other state police forces in Australia as the foremost police force from the point of view of equipment, wages and conditions and everything else for the police forces. For instance, the ACT Police Force was the first police force in Australia to get revolving blue lights on their cars. Quite a number of other things that the ACT Police Force, because it was a small police force, they were able to do things which the other larger state police forces weren't able to do. And the Accident Investigation Squad, which had been set up under a former Commissioner, Ted Richards, was quite unique in Australia, and we used to investigate all serious and fatal accidents in the ACT. And in those days, we talk about our fatal accident number now. In those days, even though Canberra was a lot smaller, we were running at 25, 30 and even up one year up to 40 fatal accidents in the year. There was probably less crime in some ways. The crime rate really took off in both the ACT and right throughout Australia with the advent of the drug problem. So in the early 1970s in the ACT, to give you an idea, detectives went to all burglaries. So if there was a burglary, detectives turned up there. We'd had a week or so of heavy rain in Canberra, of big storms coming over, and I lived, as a matter of fact, in the Lions area. And we were up in the meal room that evening looking out, we could see this monster storm coming out over the valley, and we thought we were going to get wet. So we were then sent to an accident in Narrabundah, and then later on we started hearing the radio calls. There was a radio operator called Phil Klein. Phil was quite well known, a lot of the older, and Phil did an excellent job that night. And Phil started calling down that Yarra Glen was being flooded and cars were being washed off the road. We immediately went there, tried to block off Yarra Glen, and cars were driving around us into the actual flood. And then we did certain other duties trying to assist people and my final job that night was that one of the interesting things about it was that I did get at one stage sent into City to get some more ropes and so on. And when I got to Adelaide Avenue, just near the Prime Minister's Lodge, the road was bone dry, yet there'd been over, in the old measurements, over 5 inches of rain in a half an hour, they estimated, in the Woden Valley. And there were cars bobbing up and down like corks on Yarra Glen. The tow truck drivers were there going in and actually putting tow ropes onto them and hauling them out like fish. They were pulling them out. But of course, unfortunately, we lost a lot of lives that night. There were 7 or 8 people. And my last job that night was to put the body of a little 7-year-old girl into the mortuary. She was one of the few bodies we found that night, and I put her into the mortuary. And I think this was around about 1973, 74, and the Vietnam War was at its height, and they decided to have what was called the Aquarius Festival in Canberra, and all the very left-wing students were all invited to come to the Aquarius Festival. It was going to be free love, free grass, free everything else in Canberra. So we had about 10,000 students from all over Canberra turn up here. On about the Thursday, I think it was, they besieged the South African embassy and it became quite violent there, and a couple of police, including Rick Ninnis, who was well known, was quite seriously hurt. And on the Friday they said they were going to do the same as had happened in Washington. They were going to close Canberra down. There was going to be a day of rage and close every government department in Canberra. So it started in the morning, we were all rostered, and they started their march from the university down to Grima Place. They then marched around Canberra and tried to block off foreign affairs, the defence establishments, and we gradually arrested them through the day. We went round in buses preceding them. And then eventually in the afternoon they got outside City Police Station and were demanding that all the people who had been arrested, which at that stage were over about 200, be released, otherwise they're going to smash the police station up. And for the first time ever, they had rushed the legislation through for the Public Order Act, and it had never been used before in Canberra. It was in fact read out by Mr. Kennedy, who at that stage was a superintendent. He read it out and gave them 15 minutes to disperse. In the meantime, they threw a rock and smashed one of the windows at City Police Station. And then we were then given the go-ahead to clear them out of the big square in front of the police station, which we did, made a number of arrests there. I also ran the operations support group with another Sergeant Dennis Harris, who's since deceased, and that was the forerunner of the riot squad. So we used to actually attend nearly all the major demonstrations. Later on I attended ADEX, you've probably heard of ADEX. I was one of the superintendents at ADEX. So I had picked up quite a bit of crowd control experience over the years, and we just had to have people who were of similar, and we were deployed quite often, particularly if there's going to be a pretty substantial demonstration. In some ways it's changed quite dramatically. With computers, DNA, all of those sort of things, but I believe that the basic skills of a police officer are still the same. You have got to talk to people. It doesn't matter what you do. Yes, you might be able to solve certain crimes on a computer, but most times it's going out, doing the hard work, police work, talking to people, gathering evidence and putting it all together. And if you haven't got people skills, you still should consider whether a police officer is your career, is where you want to be as a police officer.